Hello and welcome, everyone. I am excited to bring you into this conversation today. It's early April 2018, and this is the Trillium Awakening Teachers Panel on the topic of awakening into trust. My name is Margit Bentowski, and I became a Trillium teacher in 2016, interning teacher. It's my honor and pleasure to facilitate this conversation around trust, both because we have a great group of teachers here today, whom I love and respect very much, but also because I feel like the topic of trust is really important in the context of awakening. When I was a doctoral student studying psychology in the early 2000s, my dissertation topic centered around the question of self-trust. I wanted to understand what it was inside of me that I could trust, considering that oftentimes there were a lot of voices in there. And what I found that since engaging Trillium Awakening and having an embodied realization 5.5 years ago, I've almost completely transcended this question, this sort of nagging, what is trustworthy? What can I trust? So the peace that I experience now at the core of my being, I would say, is one of the biggest quality of life shifts that I can imagine. So with me today are 4 gifted teachers who will help me illuminate this fundamental shift of awakening into trust that is commonly experienced by practitioners following the Trillium path. So the first teacher I'd like to introduce to you is my dear friend and fellow interning teacher, Crystal Bacon, who goes by the name of Subhaga in our spiritual circle. Subhaga is a Washingtonian like me, and also like me became an interning Trillium teacher in 2016. She lives in a small town in the beautiful Methow Valley, which is located on the east slope of the Northern Cascades. And together with her partner Sugandhi, who's also an interning Trillium teacher, she teaches closed groups sittings online. She does virtual sittings. And Subhaga finds that the quiet, expansive landscape supports creativity and contemplation and helps her keep her grounded in embodied consciousness. So welcome, Subhaga. Great having you here.
Thank you, Margit.
Lovely to see you and be with you. Next, I want to introduce another Northwesterner, Rod Taylor. He's been teaching spiritual awakening knowledge and techniques for over 40 years. He became a Trillium Awakening teacher in 2007. He loves supporting people in their process of whole being realization and their deepening integration in their awakened nature as consciousness, being, and love. Rod has a master's degree in adult education, a post-secondary certification in conflict resolution, and lives with his beloved wife, Andrea Brooks, in British Columbia, Canada. So welcome, Rod. Great having you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to participate with you in this.
Yeah, I haven't seen you in a while, so it's really a treat to be with you.
Mm.
Haven't seen you since Thailand.
Yes, great to be doing something together like this, isn't it?
Okay. Okay, so that's the 3 of us from the West Coast, and moving inland, eastward to Fairfield, Iowa, I bring you Ciel Backstrom, one of Trillium Awakening's senior teachers. Spanning more than 4 decades, Ciel's psycho-spiritual path has broadened to include several modalities. In 1972, she became a teacher of transcendental meditation. In 1985, she was pivotal in establishing the liberal Catholic Church in Fairfield, Iowa. And CL became a teacher for Trillium Awakening in what year was that, CL? I don't know if you're muted. I forget.
That was in 2006.
2006. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
she's been with us a long time. She's also completed training as an interrelationship focusing professional. She's an energy healer certified by the Four Winds Society and a holotropic breathwork facilitator. She offers private sessions, weekend intensives, and retreats. And CL loves supporting people in their awakening to their true and total nature. So welcome, CL.
Thank you, Margit, and thank you so much for putting this panel together.
Yeah, thanks for participating. And last but not least, all the way from New Jersey on the East Coast, we have Gina Nen. Gina's awakening started at the young age of 15 when she had a mystical experience that took her directly into the heart of God. Gina became a Trillium Awakening teacher in 2013 and considers herself an intuitive visionary who holds an evolutionary, healing, and transformational space for students, for the collective, for all of existence. Gina's work is influenced by somatic experiencing, an approach that uses embodied awareness to heal the effects of difficult and traumatic events. Gina's long-standing health issues have given her the opportunity to develop a very refined trust in being. Welcome, Gina. It's great having you with us today.
Thank you, Margit. It's great to be with you. Awesome. And with everyone.
Yeah. So in today's conversation, which I've titled Awakening into Trust, I'm hoping we can illuminate a kind of roughly before and during and after of our experience of trust as it relates to awakening and embodied awakening, or what we in Trillium call whole being realization. I invite us to begin by first exploring how we experience trust before whole being realization. And perhaps, Subhaga, you could begin for us.
Thanks, Margit. Yes, I've been exploring this question kind of in the frame of trust in being, which has been a phrase, kind of a mantra for me for quite some time since my second birth. I was thinking about it this morning in terms of the before, during, and after process. And, it seems to me, my experience is that life is constantly bending us to its own nature, its own will, if you will, its own internal dynamic. And that we spend the majority of our lives, our first lives in particular, resisting that bending, not liking, not wanting, and I'm talking, I'm generalizing here from my own experience, my own familial experience, not wanting, not liking, wanting to change, a lot of doing energy. And so that's a struggle, it was a struggle for me. There's a desire to change things, change myself. And as I've leaned into the concept of trust, and recently, not just since this topic came up, but I'd say in the last 6 months or so working with students, it's occurred to me like trust is something that happens in your body. It doesn't happen in your head. You can't make yourself trust something or someone. It's an innate response in the body, a feeling of stability, comfort, safety. You landed in a way. So when you put those two things together, it's like, for me, what led me into this work was looking for a platform, looking for a place to land where I could feel that, where I could feel there was some stability someplace. And, because it's like everything is uncertainty, and in first life, I had a deep understanding of that. Everything is uncertainty, but it was very uncomfortable. I felt a lot of discomfort around that and a desire to try to make it different. Strategies or, either going one direction or the other direction. Hedonism and serious, strict yogic renunciate kind of existence, So I was looking for that. Where's that stability? I know there must be some stability somewhere. And I heard people talk about it. I heard a person talk about an awakening experience where she suddenly felt like she could step off into the void and, the ground just kept coming up to meet her. I want that, not a person in our tradition, but yeah. So I think that's the seeking, can be the way seeking shows up for people is, yearning for that sense of trust. Where can I be safe? Where can I find that innate sense of safety that all the spiritual traditions tell me is within me, but I'm just not able to kind of get there, land in. So I don't know if that's a good start, maybe. I don't want to say too much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I can really relate to a lot of what you're saying. Thanks. Rod, would you like to share your experience before?
Yes. Well, during this conversation, I was just going back to realize, what about childhood? And I was realizing I kind of grew up in a life in which you kind of looked to a higher power and prayed for what you wanted, and were not sure whether you were going to get it, kind of feeling. And I would say that generally I had an optimistic nature, but I discovered as I kind of emerged into adulthood that I really didn't know what was what, didn't know what I could trust or count on. And it was just up to me to try and make sense and live life. And it was interesting for me that when I soon began practice of meditation, I learned transcendental meditation, became a teacher of that quite soon, that quickly something shifted where I came into a quality of trust that I would call trust in nature, trust in life. And that capacity of trust emerged into, I can manifest what I want. And that there are ways to have intention, if it's the highest intention, and if I'm the best person I can be, to kind of create an outcome that I was hoping for and wanting, typically in the direction of evolution or in development and awakening for me, but also just in generally in life. And when I'm teaching people coming into this kind of work that we're doing, I find that most people are typically experiencing a lot of fear and non-trust in life and not knowing how to make it. And I would say that was something I know personally, but also that thread of trust. But it was trust in life, trust in consciousness, trust in life supporting my desires. And it was quite a shattering experience when life gave me something that I wasn't expecting and wasn't able to handle and didn't make sense and crushed all of my kind of hope, expectations, and confidence in life. And mysteriously, that break that I went through led me into the kind of conscious embodied awakening work that we do, that brought about a shift that, I think we'll talk about next, about what is it like in this whole being realization and what is trust there.
Thank you. Yeah, I love this possibility that trust actually can be part of what's pulling us forward. Yeah. Thank you very much, Rod. Ciel, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank those who have already spoken. I think I have similar ways of relating to trust prior to my awakening. And when I think really back, it's kind of a fascinating thing. I think when I was very young, like maybe up until 7 years old, there was a lot of trust. I just didn't know better than to trust. And the trust was placed often in the adults around me. And there was also a childlike trust in God. And then somewhere after that, between maybe 8 to 15, 16, 17, I began to lose trust in the adults that were around me. As my cognitive abilities grew, I grew to be confused by some of the choices they were making. And that eroded my trust in them. And that left me feeling very ungrounded. So the kind of naive trust that I had in my really early developmental years eroded into confusion. And yet there was still something inside of me that thought, I think there is something that's trustable. I don't know where it is. It really is what led me to a path of seeking, that I was seeking not just spiritual experience, but something that I could count on, something I could trust. And I felt there probably were some people somewhere in the world that had found that trustworthy field that I was seeking. And so that it was from naive trust to then finding a stable trust that I could then really land in and live my life from. So again, and there was some significant changes as awakening, did land. So we can talk about that in another round of this conversation, but thank you for asking the question.
Yeah, thank you, Sia. I love that consideration of early naive trust and the necessary developmental process of encountering reality and the disappointments, and then the bigger questions around trust that evolve from that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's important to keep that in mind. Thank you. Gina?
Yeah, I hope I'm gonna stay with you here. My internet is so unstable. So naive trust resonated with me very much when you said that, CL. And I had a very, very similar experience, and of being disenfranchised and disenchanted with life as I got older. And then I just really had a sense of, entering fully into just a heck of a lot of strategies in order to make up for that disenfranchisement, to make up for this missing piece, this missing link. And so there was a sense that like life was like a house of cards or something like that, just ready to fall at any time. And so life was really about managing so that the house of cards wouldn't fall apart. And so I got very good at managing my life, or trying to manage my life. And, from all different kinds of strategies that took me into achieving and also into transcending, avoiding, just trying to manage this house of cards. And like Subhaga also, I was stability, that missing link. And so that is really what drew me towards, actually I knew from a very young age, as you said in my bio, that I was the heart of God, but yet nothing around me made any sense. And so I was looking for that stability. And I loved what you said, Subhaga, like stepping into the void and having the ground come up and meet me. Oh my God, I definitely wanted that as well. I think just having a sense of coming into that, it felt like to me coming into second birth and into the whole being realization was kind of like that stepping off the cliff, and the grounded being coming up to meet me and having that stability and that safety. Actually, my whole life I was really looking for safety, and I didn't realize it until after I felt safe, that how unsafe I actually felt my whole life. And so Second Life has really been about really resting in that safety and living from that place of everlasting safety.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. resonate with the House of Cards and the strategies, and the longing for me. There was an experience of wanting to just being so bound up, wanting to eventually, somehow relax. And I, medicated to get that experience sometimes, because the system, for me was so tired of trying hard to be safe and figure things out. If I figure the external world out, or if I figure the internal world out, everything's going to be okay. So, appreciate you mentioning all the strategies. So let's go a little bit into now what actually happened in the awakening process. What did we recognize, and how did that make a difference? How did that shift things for us? Subhaga, would you like to start us off on that inquiry?
Yeah, I just want to start by just recognizing just the beauty of mutuality, and how each of your shares, I was like, yes, me too, me too, me too. How we're articulating each other's lived experience, early childhood and through the whole life stages. So that's really quite lovely. Yes. For me, I came into, so the process of awakening, that's a key, process is such a key word. There's a belief that it is an attainable goal, a product that we can get somehow, this awakening. I'm going to get my awakening. Because I came in to my awakening as a really fully transcendent experience, where there was no separation, there were no boundaries. Whatever I looked at, I was. Whatever I saw, I was in some innate way. And I'm talking about really, like a car, a plane, a bird. I remember taking my dog for a walk, and she was on one of those retractable leashes, and it was just like, whoa, there I go. I'm on this like thing on a string, It was very, very freaky and wonderful and beautiful. And I could just kind of drop into that transcendent place and look around and look at the sky. And it was like, everything I'd ever dreamed of. And then I had my confirmation conversation. Which was, really opened up a portal to fear, because I could not answer the question, how have you experienced the core wound? And boy, it was like, oh, there it is. So, what Rod was saying about fear, fear is such an innate part of our human experience. It's a survival strategy. We feel fear, and then it's acted upon by all of our conditioning, and then the patterns, and just the world at large. So for me, the process was really moving through, this kind of long honeymoon of a few months of being really transcendent, but at the same time feeling like, I'd landed somewhere, that I'd found a thing, a change that was permanent. It was like someone had wiped a layer of grime off my universal windshield, and see things really clearly. But the trust piece was really slow to come about for me. And it was really, I had a realization, maybe a year after my second birth, which I still think of as my second birth, because it was an event of bringing me forward, was a realization in A Course with Saniel that there was nothing that was not God. That's how it came to me. There was nothing that was not God. And we were really studying a lot of shadow stuff in this particular course, but it was like suddenly everything opened up, and I found, this is the trust. Whatever's happening is happening. And there's something in it, but it's not good or bad. We can feel compassion, we feel fear, we feel anger, but it's what is, and it was like after years of this, Buddhism and Hinduism and, this too shall pass and all this kind of stuff, which were just words, I suddenly landed in this place of realization that there's nothing that is not being ever. And that just gave me so much room to really exhale and expand and drop in and feel my fears and reveal my secrets and really achieve a greater sense of mutuality and really start living, my whole being realization. So that's probably enough for now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Subhaga. It's a very visceral description. That's great. Thank you. It's sometimes really hard to put into words this experience, and so I'm just hoping, those of you that are listening are taking the words into your bodies and beings, and not just trying to figure out what these teachers are sharing, but just to feel, to the extent you can, their experience in your own body and your whole being, listening as you take this conversation in, because words start failing at this point. Thank you, Subhaga. Rod, would you like to share about your awakening process?
Just want to note that I really appreciate you commenting on this isn't something to grasp and understand, because it's not a belief. Trust in being and trust is not about belief. It's actually about a discover of an underlying way that we know and are related to and can count on life in its support of us. So it's beautiful to say that, because it's fine for people to be not trusting. That's part of how we meet ourselves as we are. It's just that it's very beautiful to know that that angst that most of us have felt in one way or another has a possible shift when we drop into our whole being nature. And for me, that shift wasn't something I believed in, even though I'd been so successful in manifesting in my earlier stages of my life. I couldn't grasp this and didn't know how to make that happen. So when it did shift by leaning into this work in a continual way, in all the ways that we do, working with teachers and mentors and various retreats, the shift occurred. And it occurred for me in a moment in which it was really clear that it occurred. And what I found was that there was a way that it was okay to be me for the first time. It was still largely not okay to be me in certain ways, but fundamentally it was. And that was the beginning of a process of my whole being awakened nature, beginning then to have the ground to integrate into. So the shift of awakening into realizing consciousness, embodiment, and non-separate interconnectedness that this whole being realization reflects was also me, my ordinary me, with my challenges and fears. Only beautifully, I found this ground. It was okay to be me for the first time in such a clear way. And so I did love all the dimensions of the awakened nature, and it was confusing to have those coexisting with finite, ordinary, limited parts of me. It was like, oh no, it's gone. Oh no, but it hasn't. This back and forth. So it gave me a ground from the beginning of a sense of, oh, I can trust life in the way that it's okay to be me. I can trust being me, even though it was overshadowed by it's not okay to be me, parts of that feeling that I had. But it was fundamentally true. And it gave me a ground to live while being overshadowed at various points by this sense of not being enough, or not being okay being me, or life not being safe. But fundamentally, knowing this other, always available. But one of the things over this that I'd heard about was as a kind of a reflection of finding an integrated state of this awakening, that we learn in this work that it can take months and years. The shift occurs, but then it can take months and years to really get well integrated in that realized condition. So I was enjoying the process and interested in the confusion that also coexisted, but overall quite a quality of wellness and stability. But I do remember a point when I was thinking about, to become an interning teacher, there was something, about in the questions for the application to apply, something about trust in being. And I realized, oh, I'm not sure if that's fully, if I feel fully confident at all times in it. And so it was interesting for me carrying that question to notice after a few years, there was a point, and I remember it well now, 3 years in, when the shift occurred and I realized, oh yeah, it's always there. Meaning not that it wasn't always there before, but that distraction or that association with non-trust, kind of would flare up. But it was beautiful to find this established ground in which the fluctuations of my individuality and my limits could continue, but not bring any question to that quality of trust that I then was living and experiencing in a continual way from that point onward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rod. I love the articulation of the process of having this profound recognition of being the okayness of being you, but then the oscillating in and out of that being, more conscious and less conscious, to finally saying, oh yeah, this is just true, and really living there. So I love that illumination. Thank you for that. CL, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting trying to compress decades of experience and process into a few sentences, but I'll do my best. And it's a fascinating topic, actually, really fascinating. So when I last spoke in this panel, I talked about, going through some later teenage years, wondering what I could trust, what was fundamental or consistent, or a ground that I could find, care and rest in. And in my case, fortunately, I did learn transcendental meditation when I was only 19. So I didn't have a huge number of years of feeling very ungrounded. And it was really within a few moments of that instruction that I did drop into something that they would use the word pure consciousness or pure being. And that meeting that, even only just a little dip into it, it's like, it's so pure and so uncluttered and so uninfected that even just to dip into that, I thought, oh, this is that ground, that being that I can fundamentally trust. And so I would, I engaged in a very regular meditation practice. And I do want to, obviously say this is my process. And a regular meditation process is not going to be right for everybody. But in my case, it made me very familiar with that ground of being that I could tap into. And it was so stable. And it really brought a lot of stability. And then it brought more, with that stableness, it brought more creativity and more confidence and all kinds of other gifts in terms of my life. And I, that was kind of one of my more stable practices for decades. And then it was in 1996, I had a rather epiphanal awakening to consciousness, where it wasn't that I was dipping into it during a meditation practice. I recognized that fundamentally I was consciousness. And so then that the trust actually magnified, because I am that. This I am that, thou art that, all this is that alone is. I am consciousness. There's no question about it. And at the same time, I'm still living my life as a, mother and et cetera, all the kind of demands and, the ups and downs of living life. But I was fundamentally identified with consciousness or being. And so there was a lot of trust there in the stability that consciousness has in its just unmanifest form. But I wanted to also bring, that is not what we consider to be an embodied awakening. And in truth, it was very unembodied. It was because I was so identified with the field of non-change. I wasn't as identified with my body, although I knew I had a body. My body would have aches and pains, but there was still a little bit of separation. And so then in terms of this particular work, this path of whole being realization, where the wholeness of us, I love this whole being, that I really dropped into my humanity. And it was, in my case, it was a very, again, epiphanal type experience, sudden experience that let me land in this body as consciousness. And that actually, though, again, this is a process, a developmental process, a developmental spiritual process. And for a time, it kind of disturbed my trust in being, actually, because it's like, how can I trust this? What happened to that which is everywhere, that has me connected with everywhere? Now, so much of my attention is now seated in my own body, and also particularly in my heart. And it was like, what happened here? Like, how can all of this be squeezed into this small frame and lived from here? But it was also very exciting because in essence, I hadn't lost the trust in being, in consciousness, but I just had to start living it in a different way. And there was a part of me that knew, because it was about 6 years of living this more awakening to consciousness, I began to realize that, I'm leaving something out here. When I first heard this, the name of this work was Waking Down. And as soon as I heard Waking Down, I kind of like thought, oh, I'm busted here. I am not waking down into my humanity. I'm waking out into consciousness. And I really the gift of having a human body should not be sacrificed to living this very blissful life of consciousness. I have to come down into my body. And it was, it took some months in this work before that happened. I had trust in others at the time. I had a trust in teachers and fellow participants. I had a template off of them in their awakened process. So there was a kind of transfer of trust to other at that point in time, to trust that they were still emanating, radiating a greater awakening than I was so far living. And I had to trust that so that I could then begin to find that awakening in myself. So for me, trust of being and trust of self have been intimately connected, but maybe that's a time for another circle or another panel or something like that. But yeah, it's been a process, and it's a process that continues. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ciel, for that beautiful story. And I love the discernment around the different stages of awakening to consciousness and what that gives you, and the development of trust, and then the embodiment part, and how that is a consideration around trust. And what it made me think of is how in my dissertation I was contracted around which of my subparts could I trust when there's chaos in my being, and then realizing there's something in me that knew that trust in being was related to trust in life. Like trust in self and trust in life were inextricably woven together. And your story does a great job of visceralizing that recognition, if I can use that word or make up that word. So yeah, thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Gina, love to hear from you.
Yeah. So it's so beautiful. It's like so many so many similarities between our stories in many ways, and uniqueness as well. Similar to what Ciel was sharing, I also had been doing a lot of meditating before I came into the Trillium Awakening work, the Waking Down work. And of that stillness, and actually had a sense of that stillness my whole life, but was drawn more and more into that in meditation. But yet at the same time, it felt like I felt all this chaos. So it's like stillness and chaos, and somehow they were dissociated or separate. And so really in my whole being realization, I had a big bang experience, literally. I realized myself as the Big Bang. So from nothingness to became words, like the word, and then literally banged out into being non-separate from all phenomena. And so it totally took me out of my body, but also completely identified with being consciousness as everything in form, holding everything and everything in form. And it took me quite some time to actually come down into my body. I knew that I needed to come down into my body. But it was sort of a natural progression that happened probably a week or a couple of days or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but this body, this being in the body, being able to be the fusion of the stillness and that movement or chaos in the body is really been the key to trusting, being able to trust whatever is happening, being able to be the stillness in the body, being able to feel in the body whatever comes up, whatever is happening, my triggers, whatever that may be. That has really been where I've been able to, I guess, live from this place of being able to be all of that. And trusting has come from this stability that that really landed in me as I had this increasing capacity to be with whatever was coming up. And so the body has always been a really important aspect of my awakening process. I take, like people, take things to the mat, I take things to the body. Yeah, let's see if there was anything else I wanted to say about that. Maybe, but that's probably enough for now.
Well, thank you, Gina. I can feel my body humming in resonance, and I was particularly struck by the word, the fusion of the stillness and the chaos. That it's living that. Paradoxically, it's living that fusion that gives you this experience of trust. And like Rod says, it's not a belief, it's not something you really understand, but I can feel the truth of it as I listen to you. And it's such a visceral expression of that. Thank you, Gina. That's great. Yeah. So as we're shifting to the home stretch of this conversation for today, I was thinking it might be helpful for people to hear a little bit about, what exactly are we trusting, and how does it feel to live from this way? How, it's such a fundamentally different way of orienting towards life than before awakening. So I just want to hear a little bit about, like, what is it exactly that we're trusting, and what's it like to live from this place? So we'll go around the circle again, and we'll start with Subhaga.
These questions are also rich to lean into. I'm still just resonating so deeply with the last couple of shares, and about the body, dropping into the body, becoming embodied, deepening into that. It's like that fusion of consciousness and embodiment, for me, is where the trust comes from. Feeling this, feeling this body, trusting. Boy, it's like I said earlier, words are usually my friends, but I feel they abandoned me. I'm feeling so much transmission, for one thing. I'm sort of like, woohoo, maybe I'm out there a little bit. But, wow, what can I say? I had so much trouble resting in my body throughout my lifetime. I was pretty disembodied. And I had, sexuality and gender issues and so forth that really were problematic in my life, and caused me a lot of, bumping up against the world. And of course, age, removes some of that, of course, but the more I have followed this path and allowed myself to become called forward, You know, I was called forward. I landed in the second birth, and then I continued. You know, I continued to work with teachers and go to sittings and attend workshops, and eventually, you know, I was called. I had a lot of noise about whether I was going to be able to take any of these advanced courses, and then suddenly the way opened, and I was led forward, you know, and I took the DSL and I took the AMS and was called forward to apply to become a mentor. I was called forward to apply to become an interning teacher. And so it's like the mutuality of that, you know, really just allowing myself to be led through what I feel in my body, you know, has been just a really amazing part of the process for me. You know, I'm aging and experiencing aging. I've had trouble with my spine and nerve pain. And, you know, sometimes it's quite difficult and uncomfortable. And yet, and there's fear that arises like, oh, it's happening, you know. And yet undergirding all of that is this awareness that there's ultimately really nothing to do, nothing to be afraid of. And I was terrified of death growing up. It's one of my early memories from childhood. And I retained it for a long time into my adulthood. It was a joke in my family that, you know, I wanted to be frozen, plugged in, you know, whatever. And my sister would be like, we'll just say, we'll just unplug her. She can't hear us anyway, you know. I wanted to be kept alive at all costs. I was terrified of death. And that has gone. I've lost that. You know, that has fallen away. There's a trust in just the inherent nature of this short-term lived experience as this particular form, you know. I don't know if this is making any sense at all. But in any event, you know, that's what I trust in. I wake up in the morning and I feel myself and I feel the space and I see the light coming in, and then I think, oh shit, I've got to do this or that, or phone has to be looked at. Doesn't matter. Fundamentally, everything is okay. And I just, that is unwavering for me at this point. Nothing to be afraid of, even though I know some things will be hurtful. Deaths will happen, losses will happen, disappointments will happen. But underneath of all that, fundamentally, everything is okay. And I just trust that innately in a way that I don't think I know I never did. You know, as a kind of recovering know-it-all from here, you know, I'm a college professor by training. I get paid to be a know-it-all, to know everything, to have all the answers. It's a not knowing is also a knowing in a beautiful sort of paradoxical way. It's like, it's all good because no matter what happens, there's this. It's always, it was here before me, it'll be here after me. Remembering that is the trust, I guess. Yeah. That'll do it.
That'll do it. Thank you, Subhaga. I'm starting to feel the transmission too. So I think the words are going to be a little challenging as we go along. I just love the expression of, you know, this fundamental, you know, ness of this wellness, this okayness. And what a profound before and after example of being afraid of death and then that not being an issue. I mean, that's a pretty stark contrast, and I appreciate you highlighting that. For the people who are watching this video, I just want to unpack a couple of acronyms. DSL is Deepening Your Second Life. It's a class that's available to students once they've had their whole being realization. And AMS is Advanced Mutuality Skills, which is the third of 3 classes that practitioners need to complete in order to become a mentor in this work. And then from mentoring, there's a process to becoming interning teachers, but I just want to let you know what we mean by those terms. All right, thank you so much. Okay. Rod, I welcome you. What do you trust and how does it live?
You know, I was just came up to me that it's worth noting that we are manifest beings. And as much as our human history has been about realizing, you know, you could say consciousness outside of our being nature, the fact is that we are bodies and we are interconnected and related beings in creation. So when we look at it that way, it's interesting to note what that feels like. And one of the most crucial pieces, both for awakening and particularly for integrating an awakening, has been this voicing of a condition or a feeling of a core wound that Samuel Bonder first referred to. Core wound, meaning not that we're wounded, but actually that something feels not quite right within us, and that it's beyond our individual life history and hurts. It's something more foundational than that. And as we investigate that, we find beyond our personal issues is a sense of discomfort that's been propelling our evolution, our growing, our meditating, our finding love, and so on. It's been driven perhaps from this core discomfort. And when people have an interest in coming into this work, it seems to be a shift from going out and away from human discomfort into being present with it and meeting it and discovering what it's like to be ourselves. And in that process, we find at the foundation of our nature the coexistence of infinite and finite. And they're not meldable or mergeable. And it's confusing because there's a perfection and never changing, and there's an there's a finite quality of aging and changing. And so when we investigate that, and particularly over time, as the refinement in my second life, whole being realization has occurred, the discovery of a dynamic at the ground that was never a wound. It was actually a dynamic in which consciousness, beingness, and non-separate interconnectedness, or the relatedness field, were coexisting but not melding as the creation point or origin point of life and our life. So we are consciousness, we are matter, we are relatedness. And that relatedness field, from my discoveries, is love. So we are all what I've found comforting not as a release of a wound, but actually a sitting in that ground of us, is a fire of our being, a fire of consciousness, being, love. When we find that and know ourselves as that, then what is there not to trust? Trust isn't even a question because we are being life. It's emerging as us, it's emerging as everything. So trust can't be believed in and be foundational. It has to be discovered and lived to be true constantly and increasingly. So when we know that, then we're living in the field of the manifest life that has its origin as consciousness, beingness, love. And so we're able then to feel the discomfort and surrender increasingly to being that original fire that is the source of trust. And it turns out it's also the source of freedom and also the source of love. And it is our nature. So in that way, we begin to find that we are being. And so is everything else. There isn't a boundary to being me. And so we begin to find that life is not just serving us within, but it's serving us without. And that's pretty exciting because then I find even the things I don't like that come along, I automatically can't not know they're there serving me, prodding my evolution, allowing me to lean into a further humbling of my nature in the realization of my limits and my wholeness. And on it goes from this fundamental ground of our source as the field of trust, as the field of beingness, as the field of consciousness, and particularly as the field of love. It's like life is loving us when we're sitting in that realization. And it's beautiful to begin to notice that. And how do we do that? Well, we do it through the processes that we're all engaged in this whole being realization process that we've been working through in the Trillium Awakening work. And particularly by meeting the self over and over again to find that ground that is actually infinite and whole and all and love.
Amen, huh? Wow, Rod, thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. What is there not to trust? And, you know, I may or may not trust my partner to remember to turn the stove off after they've cooked, but we're talking on a completely different level here, and just the wellspring that you point to, the wellspring of being, that this is all for us in service. This invokes just this delight and possibility and play and creativity, you know. So yeah, thank you so much, Rod. Look forward to hearing all of this again. CL, would you like to share with us your experience of trust?
Yeah, it's a great question when I think of what is it that I'm placing my trust in, and how could I, express that in words? And again, referring back to some things that I said in earlier round, that this ground of being that is so a field of non-change, that is eternal, that is omnipresent. It's just by its very changing nature, for me, it feels very trustable. But as my awakening continues to progress and I really understand that I am that ground of being, it becomes not so much, although it's also a trust in being, but a trust in self. And I'm not suggesting this is, some spiritual traditions have an S with a capital S, self with a capital S and self with a small s. Some refer to one to be as being ego. So it's not a trust in ego, but it's a trust in fundamentally who I am. And that feels like so yummy and delicious, because I'm not just trusting something that's alive but external, alive but a ground beneath me. It is the ground beneath me and gives me so much stability. But I too am that ground that I am, that is beneath me. So that trust in self is beginning to be lived in a very like a delicious way as my awakening progresses. And I'm really, I'm probably not going to be using perhaps this metaphor quite the same way that Rod did, but I loved this example of origin point, that expression. And that what I was hearing him say was that origin point is that place where, place is again a word to point to, but let's call it the place where that field of non-change and the field of change coexist. That for the human, there has to be that origin point, has to be the field of change and the non-change, because without the field of change, how can there be humanity? And so there's something in me that's also growing to trust, to rest into, to relax into the field of change, and not to try to over control it, to let it flow where it is naturally flowing, not to kind of like, I'm going to create, dams and things like that to block up the field of change. It's like, no, I'm letting the field of change flow. And like, as Rod said, if we consider that to be also the origin point from which humanity can emerge, or just the field of, of the relative existence can emerge, then we can grow to trust the field of non-change, and we can trust the field of change. And at the same time, I won't say it right, but that old expression, trust in Allah, but tie up your camel, in the field of non-change, we still do things like tie up our camel or go and check to see if the stove got turned off. So there's that dynamic there of trusting in self with a capital S, trusting in nature or in being in its unmanifest form, and trusting the field of change and trusting my own sense of common sense, that I will respond appropriately in life, and life will then be even more rich and juicy to me because I'm actually engaging as opposed to just an out surrender. I get to play a player here, and that makes it really juicy. So I think that was pretty much all I needed to say, but thank you.
Wow, thank you, CL. I love the invitation to trust the field of change. And what stood out for me was the word flow and the other word engagement. So there's something about flow and engagement that is a different way of being. That's I just feel the juiciness of that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Gina, I'd love to hear from you in this final round.
Wow, again, so much of what everyone said has resonated so deeply. So for me, I guess that trust, what am I trusting? Yeah, trusting that which never changes, and that which always holds me, and trusting that I am also that, and I am also all the movement. And so it's like simultaneously being, the ocean and the waves. Obviously, the ocean is the waves, so I don't need to not trust anything about the waves. I can actually be the wave, and being that movement, trusting whatever is happening is for me, absolutely for my development and evolution. I definitely resonated with what Rod was speaking there, and really trusting the potentiality that is actually arising, and it's in its rawness oftentimes, and not needing to at all shelter myself from the potentiality, but to enter into it fully. I love the word fire, and to not be holding back. This is consciousness embodied. Yeah, to not be holding back from the potentiality. Having had the Big Bang awakening experience, I hold that very much in my body, the potentiality. And so trusting that, and trusting other and whatever is happening in relationship. Although, there may be things about the other that, aren't trustworthy, what I can trust is what is happening between us. And I can trust the other person at the deepest level and the potentiality that is there for them in their development. So trusting their development, trusting my development. Yeah. And so whatever is showing up, even my mistakes, trusting my mistakes, whatever is before me, trusting that. And yeah, that brings my heart a lot of ease and happiness, actually, just speaking that. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I'm feeling my body settled by that, no matter what, and trusting the exchange, the dance, the fire. I invite us all to take a moment in silence, and you, the viewer or listener, just to close our eyes just for a moment and just feel. Can I say just one more time? Close our eyes and feel how this conversation has impacted you, impacted us. And taking a moment to feel gratitude for this conversation and anything about this conversation that you found valuable. Or supportive. And even if there's something that felt off or there was a question, perhaps letting yourself feel gratitude for the question, because the questions or the thing that feels a little incomplete is what will carry you forward to your next step. Okay. Thank you all for participating.
Beautiful job you've done. Thank you. Wonderfully handled this whole call and what beautifully planned. Grateful to you for doing it so beautifully.
Thank you for participating and sharing all your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who are watching this are not familiar with Trillium Awakening, you can go to trilliumawakening.org and find lots of resources there. Learn about our teachings and our wonderful pool of teachers. And we're here to support you in whatever way we can. And if you are drawn to any one of us on this call in particular, you can go to the teachers page and find contact information on that website's teachers page. All right. Thank you for joining us today. Take care.
Bye-bye.
I was going to say, may the force be with you, but we know it already is, right? Bye for now.